In November 1872, the American merchant ship Mary Celeste left New York for Genoa, Italy, carrying a cargo of industrial alcohol. There were 10 people on board: Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and 7 crewmen. Everything seemed normal at departure. The ship was in good condition, the weather wasn't unusually harsh, and the voyage looked like any other Atlantic crossing. But on December 4, 1872, near the Azores, a Canadian vessel spotted the Mary Celeste drifting in a strange, aimless way, as if no one were steering her. When they boarded, what struck them wasn't destruction. It was a chilling silence. There wasn't a single person in sight. Personal belongings were still there, and the cargo was intact. There were no clear signs of looting. And the most unsettling detail, the ship's only lifeboat was missing. Why would an experienced crew abandon a vessel that was still seaworthy? If it was pirates, why was the cargo untouched? If it was mutiny, why were there no signs of a struggle? If it was an accident, why were there no distress calls, no debris, not a single body? An investigation began, and theories multiplied. But none of them fit all the facts. And so the Mary Celeste became a legend. 10 souls vanished, and the sea returned only a ship, in silence. But the sea never answers, and sometimes it swallows an entire massive ship whole. In 1918, in the Atlantic/Caribbean region, the U.S. Navy operated a massive cargo ship called USS Cyclops, AC-4. This wasn't a small vessel, and it wasn't obscure. It was a crucial wartime link, so even being slightly off schedule was enough to draw attention. Cyclops left Brazil, loaded with manganese ore, bound for Baltimore. At first, everything looked like a routine transport run. A clear route, planned stops, an experienced crew. There were no reports of attack, no distress messages, no major warning signs beforehand. Then, in early March 1918, after departing Barbados, Cyclops vanished. No distress signal, no drifting debris, no oil slick, no witnesses, just a cold, blank space along its route, as if the ship had never existed. The disappearance quickly became one of America's most famous maritime mysteries. It later tied to an unsettling name, the Bermuda Triangle. Theories poured in: storms, structural failure, a maritime accident, even wartime action. But the problem is simple. There's no wreck to prove anything. And when there's no evidence, the ocean always wins. A ship that large vanished as if it had never existed. And while people were still searching, another disappearance began, this time an Australian Titanic. In 1909, off the coast of South Africa, there was a passenger and cargo ship called SS Waratah. It was still very new and was expected to become a symbol of the Europe-Australia sea route, so people gave it an unsettling nickname, Australia's Titanic. That voyage seemed ordinary. Waratah was on a familiar route, leaving Durban for Cape Town. On board were passengers carrying plans, hopes, and entire futures ahead of them. No one imagined the trip would become a final full stop. Then, in late July 1909, Waratah disappeared. No distress signal, no confirmed debris, no wreck. Only the sea, and a chilling void, as if the ship had been erased from the surface in a single moment. Around 211 people vanished with it. More than a century has passed, yet the questions remain the same. Did Waratah meet a storm, capsize, suffer a boiler explosion, or fall victim to some disaster history never had time to record? With no wreck, there is no ending, only speculation that refuses to die. A ship filled with hope, erased by the sea in a single night. But sometimes the mystery isn't that a ship sank. It's that the ship remains, and the people do not. In 1921, off the coast of North Carolina, in the notoriously dangerous waters of Diamond Shoals/Cape Hatteras, people came upon a strange sight. A five-masted schooner named Carroll A. Deering sitting hard aground, as if someone had simply set it down on the sand. What made it even stranger was that, up to that point, the ship had been operating normally. There were no reports of a catastrophic storm, no distress calls, no sign of any major disaster. It seemed like it might have been nothing more than an unfortunate grounding. But the moment people climbed aboard, the feeling turned instantly chilling. Not a single crewman was there, and the most critical items had vanished, selectively: the navigation equipment, the ship's logbooks, and the lifeboats. The ship was still there, but everything tied to the decision to abandon ship had been stripped away, as if someone didn't want to leave a trail. An investigation followed, and theories poured in: pirates, mutiny, sudden shifts in weather, or an emergency that forced the entire crew to flee in panic. But the problem was the same as with the Mary Celeste: no witnesses and no evidence strong enough to close the case. In the end, Carroll A. Deering entered the ranks of America's most famous ghost ships. The ship sat there like a crime scene, but the witnesses had been carried away by the sea. Transition line. And as we move into the modern era, even high-tech ships can vanish in a storm. In 1978, in the middle of the North Atlantic, the German cargo ship MS München, operated by Hapag-Lloyd, left Bremerhaven bound for Savannah, a familiar shipping route. This wasn't an old, fragile vessel. München was considered modern and robust, the kind of ship people believed could withstand even the worst weather. Everything began normally, until the ship entered stormy seas. In the darkness and howling wind, fragmented emergency signals were recorded, like someone trying to speak through choking breaths. And then, silence. No further transmissions, no more coordinates, only an ocean in rage. An international search effort was launched, but what was recovered were only scattered traces, too little to truly explain what happened in the final moments. And that very absence made the fear grow. The idea of a rogue wave was raised, a towering wall of water capable of breaking everything in seconds. The ending remained as cold as the sea itself. No survivors, and the ship vanished as if it had been erased from the surface. An SOS in the storm, and then the ocean went quiet. But sometimes you don't need a mystical storm, just an ordinary voyage through dangerous waters. In 1963, off the southern coast of Florida, a specialized ship named SS Marine Sulphur Queen was carrying out a highly technical mission, transporting molten sulfur. This wasn't a leisure voyage or a passenger ship. It was a working transport vessel, running a cargo route like countless others. At first, everything seemed normal: a specialized shipment, a familiar route, no reports of attack or major trouble. But then, at some moment out at sea, the Marine Sulphur Queen lost contact and vanished. There was no clear distress call, no final signal precise enough to narrow down a search area. When search teams moved in, what they recovered were only a few small, scattered traces, so fragmentary that they couldn't be assembled into a complete story. Out in the open ocean, the most frightening thing isn't too many clues, it's having almost nothing at all. The investigation that followed was shocking for one cold conclusion: the ship may not have been truly seaworthy, not as safe to sail as people believed. And when you're carrying a particularly hazardous cargo, even a single weakness in design, operation, or structure can turn an entire ship into a trap. The outcome was recorded with brutal simplicity. 39 people were believed to have died, and the Coast Guard investigation left behind one bitter truth: the sea doesn't need miracles to swallow a ship whole. Some ships don't need supernatural mysteries, just a hidden risk. And then, another name was pulled into the Bermuda legend. Only decades later did a real clue finally surface. In 1925, off the southeastern United States in the Atlantic Ocean, the coal ship SS Cotopaxi left Charleston for Havana, carrying a cargo that seemed completely ordinary. Then a storm moved in. On December 1st, 1925, Cotopaxi sent a distress signal. The ship was listing, taking on water, and struggling in a tropical storm. After that, it disappeared. No further contact. It never arrived in port, and the name Cotopaxi began to be retold again and again as another victim of the Bermuda Triangle. But the story didn't end there. A shipwreck off the coast of Florida had been known to divers since the 1980s, nicknamed the Bear Wreck, yet no one could confidently identify it. Not until January 2020, after years of comparing records and physical clues, was it finally identified as the SS Cotopaxi, a delayed ending for something once labeled vanished without a trace. Some mysteries don't disappear. They simply sleep on the seafloor for a very long time. But the most terrifying kind is still this: the ship remains, while the people do not. Like a Pacific Ocean Mary Celeste. In 1955, in the South Pacific, the ship MV Joyita left Samoa bound for Tokelau. It was only a short trip, expected to take about 2 days, carrying cargo and passengers like countless routine sea journeys. But Joyita never arrived. When the ship was overdue, a search began. And then they found it. But what made everyone's blood run cold was this: the ship was still afloat, still drifting. Yet there was no one on board. A total of 25 people had vanished. There was no message, no clear sign of an attack, and no simple explanation for why the entire group would abandon the vessel. The scene was filled with details that didn't add up. Belongings left behind, no clear pattern of chaos, and the biggest question of all: why leave the ship at all when Joyita was believed to be extremely hard to sink? An official investigation followed. But the more they examined it, the more confused they became, because the evidence was too scattered, and every theory had holes. The final conclusion was as cold as the sea itself. The available evidence could not fully explain what happened. A ship that was hard to sink, drifting back like a question. And as the war entered its most brutal phase, there were ships that disappeared, leaving people unsure whether it was an accident or war. In 1941, in the Caribbean/Atlantic region, there was a ship with a very military-sounding name, USS Proteus, AC-9. Even though it was operating in a civilian capacity at the time, what sends a chill down people's spines is this: Proteus belonged to the same family as USS Cyclops, a name that had already become a symbol of vanishings without a trace. At first, everything looked normal, a routine cargo/ore run along familiar routes. In wartime, ships were constantly moving through these waters, and most people assumed that if something went wrong, at least there would be a distress signal, or some piece of evidence floating to the surface. But then, after a point in its journey in late 1941, Proteus disappeared. No distress call, no final transmission, no trace strong enough to confirm what happened at sea. And because this was wartime, one theory immediately surfaced with the smell of history on it: a German U-boat attack. But the terrifying part is, there was no definitive claim, no stamped record confirming it. Only speculation and a void. With no wreck found, you can't close the case with cold certainty. All you can do is look at the map, look at the route, and accept a brutal fact. The sea swallowed it and returned nothing. The silence dragged on, and the file was reduced to a single line: lost at sea. But that wasn't the end. Another sister ship would disappear in almost the exact same way. Also in 1941, another ship carried a familiar U.S. Navy name, USS Nereus, AC-10. It too was operating in a civilian capacity at the time and was used to transport ore/bauxite for wartime production. The ship departed St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, and began its voyage through waters already famous for rumors and for empty spaces on the map. At first, nothing seemed especially unusual. The cargo run was on schedule, the route was familiar, and the mission was clear. And in wartime, if something went wrong, people at least hoped there would be something: a distress signal, a piece of wreckage, an oil slick, anything to prove the ship had truly met disaster. But Nereus left port and then vanished. No signal, no report, no wreck, and just like Proteus, the U-boat theory surfaced again. But the same crucial thing was missing: no confirmed claim, no decisive evidence. So even today, the cause remains stuck in a gray zone. Maritime accident, weather, structural failure, wartime action, all possible and none proven. The most unsettling part is when you place the three names side by side. You realize it no longer feels like a single isolated case. It feels like a pattern of disappearances, as if the ocean is holding a secret humans were never meant to touch. Three names: Cyclops, Proteus, Nereus, like a string of ellipses across the ocean. And then, in the modern era, an American cargo ship vanished so completely that people had nothing to hold on to. In 1980, in the North Atlantic, the American cargo ship SS Poet left port and began what seemed like a routine transport voyage. It wasn't a cruise ship, and it wasn't a warship, just a merchant vessel running a sea route like thousands of others. Then at some point, SS Poet lost contact. There was no clear distress signal, no final emergency call, no coordinates to narrow down a search area. The ship simply vanished from the system, like a dark shadow slipping out of the light. When the U.S. Coast Guard got involved, what made the case file truly chilling was its hard conclusion. There were no significant traces, no ship, no people, no debris sufficient to determine what had happened. There were 34 crew members on board, and with no scene to investigate, the inquiry was like trying to assemble a picture out of empty air. You can suspect storms, mechanical failure, a disaster that happened too fast to report, but when the sea returns nothing, every theory becomes just a voice echoing into silence. It wasn't that the ship sank, it was that it was erased from the map. But if you rewind time, you'll see the ocean had done this many times before, even to luxury passenger ships back in the 19th century. In 1841, in the North Atlantic, the passenger steamship SS President left New York bound for Liverpool. At the time, it was a highly notable vessel, large, modern by the standards of the era, and seen as a symbol of transatlantic travel that ran on schedule, en route. At first, everything unfolded like a standard crossing, leaving port, entering the Atlantic lane, carrying passengers who believed all they had to do was wait for the day they stepped onto the far shore. Then the storm arrived. SS President was seen struggling in rough weather, an image alarming enough to worry people, but not enough for anyone to imagine the ship would vanish completely. And that is what makes it terrifying. After that moment, it was never seen again. No arrival, no signal, no confirmed debris to prove where it sank, when it happened, or why. When there were about 136 people on board, and because no official, certain cause was ever established, the disappearance became a long-running headline, one that could only be tied to storms and the fragility of technology at the time, rather than closed with evidence. A ship once called the largest in the world, but not larger than the storm and the silence. And just a few years later, another name would also vanish without a trace along the Liverpool-New York route. In 1856, in the North Atlantic, the steamship SS Pacific left Liverpool for New York, a familiar transatlantic route with heavy traffic, one that seemed far safer than the age of exploration. At first, nothing seemed unusual. A scheduled voyage on a standard route, carrying passengers and crew like countless other Atlantic crossings. But then, SS Pacific never arrived. There was no distress report, no final signal, not a single piece of debris solid enough to confirm what happened. The only thing that remained was a cold phrase that entered records and later writings: vanished without a trace. And when there is no trace, human imagination rushes to fill the void: storms, icebergs, mechanical failure, or a disaster that struck too quickly to send a call for help. The people often mention the number of nearly 200 souls, passengers and crew, to underline how horrific the blank space left behind truly is. But the most painful part is this: even today, the case has no final certain conclusion. Some journeys end without a final line. But some cases are even more haunting, when a ship vanishes so fast that people only have time to speak its name, and then nothing. In 1893, in the North Atlantic, the cargo ship SS Naronic, operated by the White Star Line, left Liverpool bound for New York. It was a large vessel by the standards of its time, and what makes the case even more haunting is this: it had been in service only a short while. There should have been an entire lifetime of voyages ahead of it. At first, everything unfolded like an ordinary cargo run. The Liverpool to New York route was well known, and ship traffic along it wasn't rare. But then, after February 11, 1893, Naronic disappeared. No arrival, no signal, no scene to investigate. All that surfaced over time were scattered reports, rumors of a lifeboat sighting, a few fragments that couldn't be confirmed, stray stories drifting by like sea foam. There were about 60 crew members on board, along with only a small number of passengers. An investigation followed, but without a wreck, every conclusion remained only a maybe: a storm, mechanical failure, an iceberg, or a disaster that happened too fast for anyone to do anything at all. And so Naronic became a name the sea kept. No final evidence, no official answer, only a blank space filled with speculation. One name sank, and only theories rose to the surface. And then a passenger ship left Halifax, sailed into a snowstorm, and no one ever saw it again. In late January 1870, in the North Atlantic, the passenger ship SS City of Boston, operated by the Inman Line, left Halifax bound for Liverpool. It was a large ship, running a scheduled transatlantic route, and it carried passengers considered notable at the time, so even a single piece of bad news was enough to cause a shock. At first, there was no sign of an inevitable tragedy. It was a regular on-schedule voyage, like countless other Atlantic crossings. But the ship never arrived. After leaving shore, there was no distress signal, no final telegram, no confirmed wreckage to verify what happened. All history preserved was the context of that moment: snowstorms and gale-force winds, the kind of weather that can turn the ocean into a cold, crushing machine within hours. And sources often mention around 191 people, some give different numbers, but the cruelest common point is this: no trace, no evidence strong enough to reach a conclusion. The searches, the rumors, the theories, all of it eventually collapses back into the same thing: a void. A ship full of people, and the sea returned the number 0. From ghost ships drifting back, to massive vessels vanishing without a single signal, all of these stories remind us of one thing: history doesn't always lack stories. It often lacks the evidence needed to end them. From the snow-lashed North Atlantic to the rumor-filled Caribbean, the sea keeps the same old habit. It takes, and then it stays silent. And perhaps the most frightening part isn't how it happened, but the fact that we may never know for sure. And it can happen to anyone, us at any time, even now. That's why, no matter what era we live in or where we travel, we must always stay cautious. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it so more people can see it.